So when you're name calling or throwing shade at your partner, or there's that conflict where no one feels safe, no one's going to take responsibility because they don't feel safe enough to take responsibility. Like, they don't feel safe enough to be honest. They don't feel safe enough to speak their truth. Welcome to Codependency Alchemy, the podcast, where we explore the power of healing the mother wound by bringing our awareness to codependency in our relationships. Tap into my world and support the podcast by joining the Codependency Alchemy Substack community. By subscribing, you will receive weekly newsletters with shadow work prompts, masterclasses, and so much more to support you on your journey. And don't forget, if you would like to watch the video version of the podcast, you can check out the episodes on YouTube. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to Codependency Alchemy, the podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Zander, and today we have I know I said we had a super special guest last episode, but now we have Vic here, which is Patrick's partner. And so I love that we get to talk to both of you guys this month and just reflect on some relationship stuff. And just, I've got to walk alongside you for so many years as well. So I'm excited to just share like how much you have healed by bringing your awareness to codependency, because I feel like you take it and you run with it. Every time something comes in, you're like, boom, how can I implement this? How can I take this into my life and like make radical changes? And I just love that about you. So I think this episode is really just an exciting time to like celebrate how fucking far you've come and how much you've learned and how much you've grown and the benefits of all of that work that you've done.
Oh my gosh, I'm very excited to do this. I feel like this is like long overdue, and I feel like there's so many elements that I could share on with this, but just even starting out, I would say that through our friendship and also just through your work, through your coaching, it's really presented a whole other lens that I get to see life through that is really given understanding to things that I was never able to really articulate.
Yeah, I would love to hear about maybe like some of the biggest changes you've experienced in your relationship with Patrick, even like what it used to look like before you had this awareness around codependency and the way that you know about it now, and the benefits of that and how your relationship has benefited from that.
Totally. And the first thing that I think I would say is, my original really understanding of codependency was like one person needs to be needed and the other person needs somebody else, right? Like it's like these two people that essentially like there's a need based in the relationship. And for a long time I saw that as an independent pattern or an independent wound rather than this, I think the only way that I can describe it almost is like it infects the fibers of relationship. It really isn't. It's almost like an infection, right? It is parasitical is almost like the word that I would use. And it's similar to the way that I know Patrick spoke in context of addiction, and that for him has been a huge lens for him to understand himself. And I think for me, understanding contexts of relationship and patterns of behavior has been really important for me to understand myself. And for a long time, I think I saw codependency as a particular pattern rather than being the root of patterns.
Mm.
Because my personal understanding of things really was this revelation where I was like, oh my gosh, like every dysfunctional aspect of myself, of relationship, of the way that I relate to myself, others, in the world is about an absence of security and an absence of safety. And pretty much any behavior that stems from that has a codependent undertone. So my relationship with codependency in that way has really infiltrated every relationship that I've had, whether it be parental or friendship or romantic, or even when it comes to my relationship with things. There's
Mm.
absolutely been an outsourcing of really utilizing people, places, and things as a means of seeking comfort as a replacement for safety, because I never learned how to give that to myself. So, the way that that's changed for me in context of our relationship and just through your work as well has really been a deep, deep, profound understanding that when codependency shows up, I know that there is some sort of safety that I'm now responsible for providing for myself. And I'm also responsible for being curious enough to investigate, like, what is that? Where is it coming from? And what is it that I need? And moving through those really frustrating moments where it would be so much easier to point the finger at my partner and people, places, and things.
We don't see the truth behind why we're pointing the finger, which is averting responsibility and out of fear of being wrong or being perceived as like unhealed or bad. So, how can I make this other person wrong in this situation so that I can feel better? Even though that better is fleeting, like it comes, you're going to feel it for a moment, but it immediately vanishes. And then you're out seeking it again.
Yeah, and I think something there has also been, right? Because essentially I want someone to take responsibility for how I feel. But what I think I've come to understand is that people's responsibility, or my perception was always that if people take responsibility for how I feel, then they're taking some sort of responsibility for me. And that means that I'm loved, seen, acknowledged, cared about. So there was also really dismantling that distortion of what I was asking for and what was really what it was that I really needed underneath that.
Which, I mean, this is the theme for the last, like, I don't know how many episodes now, but like, it's always fucking safety. And I noticed that women keep coming to me saying, like, okay, well, how do I create safety? Well, how do I create safety? And I always turn them back to themselves. Can you sit with yourself and literally write down, how do I create safety for myself? Because you coming to me for the answer is doing the same fucking thing. You're making me responsible for being the one to tell you what you need to provide safety for yourself. What you need, I can't possibly fucking know what you need. Maybe you need to shake your ass. Maybe you need to garden. Maybe you need to like take a bath. I don't fucking know what that part of you needs, but I know that when I ask myself, it's building, you asking yourself is building trust with yourself.
Yeah. And I think something else that I realized in working with you, um, we're really good friends. I'm not like, I'm not that I don't get special client privileges at all, but like I can say this and you'll know what I mean. I can't tell you how much it pisses me off. Like every time I come to you and you bring it back to me, right? And it's always this reminder of like, oh, I already have the answer. Um, there's a it's annoying to always have the answer because what it really shows is like I don't have other ways of forming connection with people, right? It's like if I have the answer, then how am I supposed to connect with you other than to blame you?
Mm.
And I think that there's this piece where like being adversarial or confrontational or argumentative was really the way that I knew how to be friends with people. Like I remember this when I was a kid, one of my friends, we don't speak anymore, but the way like we were friends for years and the way that I made friends with her was going up to her and kicking her like directly in the behind head first into cubbies and then being like, "Do you want to be my friend?" And there was an aggression behind it. And what I realized was like aggression was right, aggression, dominance, bossiness, telling people what to do, as a very young kid for me was really um how I knew how to be in relationship with people, right? And as an adult, it really looked like mothering and fixing. But what I realized is that the piece of being responsible for myself and figuring out what I needed meant that I also had to find new ways of relating and connecting to people. Because if I knew what to do, then I didn't know how to connect with you. And I think that it was very much so, right? Like going back to the way I'd always seen codependency was like, you know, the need for one another, right? In one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
It was like it was the way that I expressed my need for connection. And it
Mm-hmm.
was it was really always easier. Like there's times with Patrick where I'm sad or I'm sensitive or I want intimacy in the sense of being held or reassured. And the easiest way for me to do that is to, like, pick a fight about something stupid, or just start poking the bear. And Patrick, being the saint that he is, and being the very patient man that he is, there are sometimes during the day when he sees me getting, like, because I know he touched on us being like neurodivergent, which is really true, and being overstimulated at times and having trouble just regulating myself. He'll just look at me and put a hand on me and he'll be like, "You're okay. Like, you're all right."
Mm,
And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm okay. I don't need to fight you right now for this. Like, okay, I'm fine."
mm,
And it, like,
mm-hmm.
helps to ground me, to reassure me, and I think that that's been something that, grateful to have a partner who understands these concepts of codependency, um, for accountability for both of us to see where that's infiltrating the relationship, but also where I've needed a lot of fucking space to explore what connection looks like outside of the bounds of codependency. And part of that has been needing a lot of space to be wildly codependent in the process, to really understand what those expressions look like in my relationship. And I think something that's been really important that I've also learned just through working with you, and just hearing you teach, has also been, it's not about the elimination of the behaviors, it's about the awareness and the action when they show up, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that it's going to show up. And I remember you saying this actually once about, I believe it was even within your family, and you said, that these two people are going to go at it. And you said, quite frankly, they need to just get
Mm-hmm.
it all out on the table. So I think that there's been another element there where, like, working with you has not given approval, right? Or co-signed toxicity, but it's like, if this is the only way for you to explore honesty right now, it's better than to be honest than to hold a resentment. And if that needs to come through in some dysfunctional ways, then how can we equip you with the tools, um, to being able to navigate from that place? And I think that gave me a lot of opportunity to not sit on big emotions, that the only way I knew how to get them out was being really toxic in the moment. And
Mm-hmm.
I've been able to refine and course correct that toxicity. Patrick talked about it, like the turnaround time of cleaning it up and not letting things linger. Um, but I think something that I've learned in this process, like a really big piece around safety with codependency, is that in order for me to figure out what makes me feel safe, I need to actually allow the expression of unsafety and dysfunction to really sometimes blast off in order to just create space.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're bringing up this. We're going to do it dysfunctionally sometimes, if not most of the time. Like, we're gonna do it that fucked up way most of the time. It's bringing awareness to the dysfunction so that when you're looking back on the situation, you can begin to see it. So, like defending yourself, for example, when I realize after the fact, when I'm reflecting or ruminating on what happened, because it probably didn't end well for anyone, I can be like, oh, fuck, I was defending myself. Okay, what does that tell me about me? It tells me I was dysregulated. It tells me I didn't feel safe. It tells me that I was afraid of being wrong because I'm afraid of being alone. So now that I can see that pattern, the healing happens in repairs. Like, they are so underappreciated. There is nothing more healing than a repair.
100%. And I think that we can sometimes think that that the aim is to not fuck it up. And I want to say that, like, really letting your toxicity rip, just like let that bitch rip. Excuse my French, but just like really let it go with awareness has been the only time that I've been present enough to even repair or correct myself. Because if it's coming from this, like, intensely trying to repress, that has actually intensified my trigger, like the
Mm-hmm.
trigger
Mm-hmm.
underneath things. So it's like there's times where I'm like, yep, she's like, this is about to just blow. And I allow it. And then it's like, as I'm venting it out, I can come in and say, and I'm very aware that everything that I'm saying right now is unacceptable. It's not okay. It's not all right. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. And I don't know how to express that what I'm really looking for right now is reassurance. And it's like, and it starts to just deflate,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And sometimes on the front end of that is like the finger pointing and then not too toxic, like name calling, like you're being such an asshole. How dare you do this? You should have da 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 da. And what's really happening here is I feel like I can't trust you and blah 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 blah. And it starts to deflate from like really bringing the awareness to the other person to slowly allowing that to turn back towards yourself. It's like, okay, it's like there's energy moving now. Can you shift it as it's coming out? Like, can you start to shift it? And for me, it usually ends in those moments. It usually ends in tears, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's the part of getting behind the anger or getting behind the trigger is actually this like real softening or surrender to be like, I feel unsafe, I'm scared, I'm terrified, I'm projecting this on you. And it feels a lot safer to be angry at you, but it's the only way I know how to access intimacy with you right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how to just go to the intimacy. And that piece about repair has been so true for me. And something that I realized, if you probably, I had this conversation with Patrick maybe like a month or two ago, and I was like, moving forward from this, because I'll share this here, that, one of my ways of dealing was always the anxious avoidant, like the disorganized is just messy. And I'm just like, well, I'll leave the relationship. And I was like, imagine being constantly threatened with abandonment.
Yeah.
Like what is that doing to my partner? And I said, I'm for 100 days, I'm not going to threaten to leave. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just in those moments gonna say, can I take a deep breath, scream in a pillow, do what I need to do, and open my heart and actually like stay present in those moments. And it's been this real game changer for me, because what I realized that it's not him, right? It's the challenge of me to actually open. And the more I do that, the more I realize like I'm not scary and angry and toxic. I'm sensitive and I feel unsafe and I'm scared. And it's really coming from such a young part of me, and actually when I allow for that to open up, he's so much more receptive.
Yeah, and that's what he and I were talking about too. It's like when you begin to like step forth and take accountability and responsibility and hold that very young part of yourself and make those repairs, it sets the stage for a safe environment for the other partner to do so. So when you're name calling or throwing shade at your partner, or there's that conflict where no one feels safe, no one's going to take responsibility because they don't feel safe enough to take responsibility. Like they don't feel safe enough to be honest. They don't feel safe enough to speak their truth. So when we soften ourselves and become vulnerable, it sets the stage and like opens up this like soft, warm, and cozy little environment of, hey, we can actually be real here with each other, without throwing daggers. It's like leave your weapons at the door. This is a weapon-free zone.
Totally. And even 4.5 years in, there's so many moments that I have to recognize that I'm responding to a past relationship and not the person in front of me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the expression of, paying for another man's mistakes. And it's like, no, it's like there were people in the past. I had a mentor, she would always say to me, she would say, Vic, water seeks its own level. And part of that was me realizing like all of my like very like toxic exes were a perfect match for who I was at those points in time, right? So there was a lot of past accountability, and I think that that was huge. Is like part of that for me, and the accountability factor was I had to understand where I had never, in the absence of abuse and disproportionate power dynamics, right? I was never really in a toxic relationship where I wasn't a match for the person I was with, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I had to see that for myself, and I had to acknowledge the parts of myself where like I'm the dangerous one to be in the relationship with. I'm actually far more abusive. than my partner may be. And this was a realization I had a few years ago. And by few, I mean like maybe, oh my gosh, 6, 7 years ago. But it was that when I'm not being abused, quote unquote abused, I become abusive and I
Mm-hmm.
start to antagonize my
Mm-hmm.
partner and I become very withdrawn. I become mean. I become bossy. I become um, very unkind because I take their kindness and compassion as like repelling to me. And that's been that, like, that I think has been the hardest part of relationship for me, has been not meeting people's kindness with unkindness and being
Mm-hmm.
unkind. And whether that gave me a skewed perception of power, the expression of don't take kindness for weakness, that was absolutely what I felt. Because at times when I was, quote unquote, being kind, I felt like I was being taken advantage of, or I was
Mm-hmm.
being hurt. So when I saw that in other people, there was something about it that um, made me feel deeply uncomfortable. And the only thing that I knew how to do in response to it was kind of punish it. And I think that learning how to be a safe place as well for my partner to cultivate safety, like that was rough. That was definitely rough. And I think that also led into looking at, not emasculating my partner. And that also looked like me not holding him responsible to meet my needs, and also understand that a lot of my needs were more preferences than anything else. Because
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot that I had to start to look at, to recognize how unsafe and uncomfortable I felt, the safer the relationship was.
Yeah, I didn't realize how much like you had talked about like demasculating your partners or like speaking down to them. I didn't realize how much I wouldn't say like demasculating Justin, like towards Justin I was, but I would say these little like remarks that were also not empowering.
Just
Really
taking cheap
needing,
shots and taking little digs at
yeah.
them, and how those things started to add up for them.
Yeah, 100%. And like noticing how he does it to me too. And the way that we do it to each other, even though it is very much not the same as it used to be, um, it's like interesting when we do that, like when we do say something that's just kind of like a little bit snide. Like yesterday we were going for a walk and I had mentioned like, oh, I'm going to record podcast episodes tomorrow, and trying to tell him like what I was going to do for my day, and he was like, what did he say? He was like, you could have done it all week, or what were you doing this week? Just kind of like this little remark of like, I didn't do anything this week. Like I had all week to record them. Why didn't I record them then? Just like something weird like that. And I was obviously took offense to it. And he was like, I was just playing with you. I was just joking. And I was like, okay, so I was supposed to hear you say, oh, you had all week to do it, and be like, I know, right? Like, and think it was funny.
Yes, and I think that for me used to be such a trick, because like that definitely will still happen. And my response, and not that it's justifies it, right? I was bullied a lot as a kid, and it was right, a lot of verbal bullying, and I never had the comebacks, right? Like I was never quick with a response. I'm very quick with a response as I've gotten older, and I've had to really learn how to curb that. But in reference to this, when that happens, my immediate defense is to like, how can I make you feel foolish?
Mm-hmm.
And because I feel, um, it feels manipulative to me when you say something that I interpret as being like hurtful, or it catches me off guard, and you're like, oh, it's just funny. And it's like, oh, so you think it's funny to see me confused or hurt? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, let me show you. And then it becomes this really, like there's this competitiveness in me of like who can hurt who, and that
Mm-hmm.
for me can snowball, absolutely. But I so relate to that feeling, um about those snide comments, and what I've realized is in those moments for me to say, that actually really hurts my feelings when you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that would feel so exposing to me, and learning to say that as I've kind of gotten older, and also as I've realized that it's safe for me to say that to Patrick. It wasn't safe for me to say it to other people in the past.
And like it's even just saying that to yourself, right? Like if you are in a relationship where that partner isn't safe to say that to, like can you at least take a moment to meet yourself in that like that comment hurts, and to be that safe place for yourself, because the more I feel like the more you become that safe place for yourself, the less tolerance you have to stay in relationships that are not healthy or that are toxic or that are really not for you, because you start to see how much you're allowing yourself to continue to be put in those. And so the more that you start tending to that part of you and meeting that part of you, the more you're just like, I don't have time for this fucking shit.
Yeah, and I think for me it was like, when I would go to valid, I was like, oh, that hurt my feelings, but now I need them to know it, or I need them to admit it. It was like my feelings couldn't be real unless somebody else
Mm,
agreed.
like validated that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I didn't understand the concept of validation for a long time, I don't think, but or I didn't realize that that's what I was looking for. But it almost was like this point of, I couldn't receive my own permission that what I
Mm-hmm.
was feeling was what I was feeling. And if I didn't have a partner or somebody else, that was a lot of what triggered an anxious response for me. It
Mm-hmm.
was like because it felt like I was losing touch with what was real, and I needed somebody else to ground me, and that was the safety that I really needed, that like what I'm feeling is real, and that I'm not kind of losing touch of myself, or like losing touch with my perception of something. So I think something else that I had to realize as I got older was like a non-negotiable within relationship for me was really being with people that could take accountability, because this was going to come up no matter what, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I needed to really make sure I was with somebody that could take that responsibility, because otherwise, right, deliberate or not, but right, this kind of gaslighting experience was so disconcerting to me, that the way that it affected me, like emotionally and mentally, um, was really devastating to me. And I also had to realize the way that I also played that part, with partners, and the way that I was manipulative, and the way that I was, I, so like one of the things I used to do with with my ex was, whenever I needed to like manipulate him into seeing that he hurt my feelings, was I would pretend to cry, and it was like the very subtle shudder as we would go to sleep, that he would think I was crying, and if I was lucky, I'd put my finger in like a glass of water and put it on my eyes so that he would think I was crying. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, kind of had a right, like in hindsight, I'm like, that's not very well of you, Victoria. Like, it's not really well of you to like be wetting your eyelashes, and something that I realized was that, for me with my partners, right, and this is just my experience, for my partners, it was an emotional inaccessibility. And for me, it was kind of insidious,
Mm-hmm.
because I was going this extra length of like being really performative, when for them it was like, it was avoidant. They just literally didn't have that emotional range. Meanwhile, I'm over here like really going out of my way to bend reality. And I had to look at the parts of me where I was like, wow, that's concerning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many women stay in relationships with people that are just continuing to mirror back what they didn't get in childhood, right? Like it took me being in a situationship where that person kept ghosting, that like we would have, they say when it's really good, it's really good, but when it's really bad, or whatever that fuck shit is. And it's like, yeah, when it's really the really bad part, all that was mirroring what happened to me when I was a child. Like rejection, abandonment, betrayal, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, over and over and over again, saying that we were going to meet up. And then when it was time for them to come over, calling, not picking up their phone, not responding, and just not hearing from them for the rest of the night. Like, not even confirming that plans are canceled, like just a full blown like disappearance. And instead, I made that one mean something about me and like I did something wrong. And two, it was like, okay, well, how can I get them to not do this next time? It was like this whole game that I was playing that was just like trying to reconcile what I experienced in my childhood with someone who was just mirroring that back to me, instead of saying, I don't have to continue to keep reliving what I experienced in my childhood. I can actually paint a different fucking picture and throw this whole bitch away.
Yeah. And I remember going through a breakup where it was kind of like receiving, like just being kind of like, right. My perception is I'm being stonewalled. They're withdrawing. And it's like, no, I had no concept of boundaries. This person told me it was over and I was just losing my mind in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But,
Mm-hmm.
I remember just being so devastated and crying one day. And my mom came to me at the time, I think I was like 26, and she said, I've known you for 26 years. She said, I've never heard you cry like this. She said, you're crying like someone died. And it was like, I was crying, there was other things that I believe were related to it, but it was like I was crying like all of that childhood trauma. Like I was just releasing so
Mm-hmm.
much. And I couldn't understand because the way that I saw it was so delusional. It was so delusional. And I think that's not something else that's like really important for me to say is like my perception of relationship and like I couldn't see codependency. I was so fucking delusional. I
Mm-hmm.
could not see outside that bubble. And it's so interesting now if I talk to friends or people, clients who are in a codependent dynamic and they're just like, oh my God, I can't believe I was, like, can you believe he did this? And I'm like, you decided to go swimming with sharks with an open wound. What did you expect? And I'm like, did the shark attack you or did you get into the shark's cage while you were bleeding? And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
I was bleeding. And it's like, so what are you mad that the shark bit you? Like, what are
Mm-hmm.
you confused about? And I see so much of myself in them. Because for me, it was like I would hack off a limb and go swimming with the sharks,
Yeah.
and I couldn't understand. I was like, oh, they attacked me. And it's like, what did you think was going to happen? And I was just so delusional that I couldn't see that for years, for years. And it wasn't even, I would just go so far as to say it wasn't just romantic relationship. It was in friendships, and being really disappointed with people. And, like attracts like I had friends that were in deeply codependent relationships. I remember, one of my best friends, she passed away now, but her boyfriend had hit her like the night before, and it was this huge brawl that they had. And she went to our friend's house and then disappeared, and we couldn't find her. So we went to the boyfriend's house and we're like pounding on the door to like reach her because our codependency of like, we need to save you from the situation. And her
Mm-hmm.
codependency with him, she came outside and this girl open hand slapped me right across my face and was like, get the F out of my face. Like, I'll do whatever I want. And I was like, oh, here I am willing to do more. Like, I screamed at this girl's mother and I was like, be a mother. Like, I just felt
Mm-hmm.
like I had all these answers and I could not see that it was my codependency with her being
Mm-hmm.
mirrored right back at me in what I was seeing, like
Mm-hmm.
what I was detesting in her and in her mother and in her partnership was the same dynamic I had with her. And it was this just, I was probably, oh my gosh, man, we were probably like 17, 18 at the time. Like we were young. So it's been infiltrated into all of my relationship and seeing how intense it was as a kid, not just romantically, but in friendship. Um, and having a history with addiction, you know, a lot of the addiction and the codependency and friendship was like, you really believed, like, not just you could fix things, but like you really believed you could save people's lives. And
Yeah.
a lot of friends I never saved. And that I think that was some of the most devastating experiences I've ever had that reinforce the codependency. Well, it's like, if it didn't work here, then I need to make it work elsewhere in all these other ways. And, you and I had a conversation back in, what was it, March, where I realized how much of that kind of inner mission um, had distorted a lot of my feelings in business around clients and getting results, is that I felt this huge responsibility to make people get it, whatever it was. Um, and just seeing how so much of that responsibility, and even now, in the littlest ways, setting boundaries um, with myself, I like, there's so much guilt. Like, just for example, yesterday, um, I went to order soup for myself. I wanted like ramen soup or something, and Patrick didn't, and I wasn't ordering it for him. I was just going to order it for me, and I started crying. He's like, "Why?" I was like, "Because I feel really guilty that I should be getting it for you if I'm getting it for me. So what? I'm just going to have the soup, and you're not going to have any." And he's like, "That's not rational. Like, I can buy my own soup." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I feel like it should be my responsibility to do it." And just seeing like the venom that I believe I have expelled in codependency still has these like deeply infiltrated little drops,
Mm-hmm.
that show up with ramen noodle soup, and at one point was so venomous that I believe that I could like save people's lives. um
Mm-hmm.
and seeing just the range of how that's taken over for me in so many ways. um
Mm-hmm.
it's the more I address it, the more I feel like I can actually see my life for what it is. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's the greatest freedom of it, is that I don't feel like I'm living under this veil. And I feel like I can just, what once may have been glimpses, is like I can see how so many people sometimes miss this opportunity to like actually see life versus
Mm-hmm.
seeing life through the filter or the lens of their codependency. And I think that that's like one of the greatest gifts, even from working with you, is like you really actually, what I thought was this like one selected area of behavior, and you just helped me blast it open. And all of a sudden I see this whole fucking map, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh shit, like this is like full scale, dude. Like, this isn't put some, salve on a wound. This is like, you need a fucking IV. You need to filter this out of everything. And that process over the past like 3 years is like, I'm like, shit, like I feel like I'm, about to be 33, and I'm just now getting a glimpse of who I am and what my life is and what it can be outside of the spectrum of codependency. And if there's anybody that like listens to this and is like, this shit is hard, and I feel like I keep having to work at this, and there's like more that keeps coming up, and it's like, do not stop, because the more you address this, the more of your life you're going to really see that is yours, and it's not hijacked
Mm-hmm.
by um this unrelenting feeling,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what it is. It's like, there's never going to be enough that you can feed to codependency to fill that deficit, but the more work you do, the more of your life you get back.
I'm really appreciative that you bring that piece in, because that is a common thing that the women I work with say is like, it's so hard. I'm tired. Like, I want him to do it. Like, he's not doing the work, so why should I do the work? Or there's just this like off-putting of like, I'm too tired to do it, and I empathize with that. I know how exhausting it is, but I'm telling you, if it's a handful of years of really fucking cleaning out all the crevices that codependency has like reached its little head in and like grabbed onto, it's worth the rest of your fucking life where you actually are in your fullest expression. You know, the antithesis of codependency is sovereignty, autonomy, self expression. So much of our lives, we haven't experienced that at fucking all. Because if we're self expressed, then that means like people will perceive me, and then like I need people to like me. And so my self expression isn't actually authentic. It's what I think you want to see. And I'm a perfect example. Like, this podcast makes me want to throw up every time I upload episodes, but every time it gets easier and easier and easier because it's like I accept myself. I feel safe within myself. I have trust built within myself that when it's received, maybe in a way that I didn't intend, I can hold space for that.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think that something I never really understood, even with my experience with codependency, was for me, and I'm curious because I don't know if I've ever heard you speak to it in this context, but it's the control issue.
Mm-hmm.
Like the control that I feel, like the need for control that
Mm-hmm.
I feel attached to all of the layers of codependency. That's the part that for me feels the most suffocating, because codependency tells me this lie, and it feels like, and I'm not going to say like mental illness, but like it feels like there's this belief in my head that like gets so stuck in there that there is somehow, it's like I can't give up, I need to keep pushing, I need to be this unrelenting, like, knocking on a steel door, because there's some sort of solution, there's some sort of perfection, there's like going to be this thing that like, oh, if this works, this is going to be it, and it's all going to happen. And I realize my exhaustion with, right, this need for control over people, places, and things, and I
Mm-hmm.
think another piece in some ways is like the solution to codependency is like a lot of surrender, and
Mm-hmm.
that coming in context with this like unrelenting need for control, um that's the part that has always been the most challenging to me, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
always told, it's like, Vic, like, surrender, surrender, surrender. And I've
Yeah.
experienced it with you in other ways, where for me what it often looks like is the way that I see the process of codependency is, and not the healing of it, but like when you're caught in it, it's a merry-go-round, it's a carousel, it's a Ferris wheel, like it's just one,
Mm-hmm.
it's getting stuck in a loop that you truly believe that there is going to be some sort of solution to it, um and there isn't. It's a
Mm-hmm.
surrender to being like, this isn't mine to fix, the only thing that's actually going to divert me from this experience is me leaving this thing that is out of my control alone, and diverting my attention back to myself. And
Mm-hmm.
that for me, as crazy as it sounds, but I think like an inner feeling with that is that like, is a guilt, and it feels like I'm giving up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's a guilt behind it, like you should have tried harder.
Yep. And I think with that there comes a fear of loss of power, which is why we don't do it. It's a false power. Like this morning was a great example. I know I'd already talked about it previously, but like I Justin and I were talking about like he was going to go do something, but I was going to record episodes in the living room. So is he going to come home through the back door or the front door? And he kind of just like had this like, I don't know, really interesting reaction to me being like, maybe you could come through the back door. And I can't even remember what he said, but it was pretty hot headed. And I was just like, okay, right now I want to defend myself or be like, that's not what I said. This is what I said. Like I wanted to like come in with that same heat. But there, I just paused and I just said nothing because anything defending myself, defense is the first act of war. What is it that I truly how is it that I truly desire to feel, and is going back and forth with him going to help me feel that way? But to your point, like there is this part of me, this protector part of me that's like, bitch, you better say something because then you're just going to give him the power and then it's just defeat and then like he wins. But who ultimately won at the end of the day? Like honestly, I did, and I didn't even really have to do much. I just was like, "Hey, this is what I'm going to do here." And I didn't give that much energy to it, and like now he's just like out for the day. Like I didn't ask him to go out for the day. He just decided on his own. Like all of it happened. So, can you rewrite if I don't say anything or if I don't go in to try to control something, to not see it as a defeat, to see it as actually like an empowering moment for you because you're not playing into something dysfunctional.
100%, 100%. And I realize, right, in hindsight, because I'm chalked up on all that adrenaline in the moment, um, that a lot of that feeling is like it's a charge. It's a
Mm-hmm.
dysregulated charge to want to fight versus take flight. And I think what's always been really interesting with me is that in the moments that I want to fight, which means that I'm willing to move closer to the thing, is that there's something there that there's a distortion in intimacy because I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually wanting to move closer,
Yeah.
but I want to come in with like the spear, um to like go after the person, right, in some way. So I know that there's always another option in that, right? And I think the other thing is like, what's the greatest casualty of war is children, right? And
Mm-hmm.
within that is also knowing like who's actually, every time I need a push to go and fight and then they push back and I feel hurt again, who's actually getting hurt is like
Mm-hmm.
the inner child, is like the casualty. And it's sometimes it's not even about, for me at least, like turn back to myself. It's like this is two parents arguing in front of a kid right now. So am I going to be the parent that wants to continue arguing, or am I going to take the kid's hand and be like, let's go deal with this elsewhere? And I
Yeah.
think that that's been really important because something I'll just say for myself is like I've had a lot of resistance to the idea of being a parent. And what I've realized is like, yeah, because you wouldn't trust yourself for shit with your inner child. Why the fuck would you want to have like a real life breathing kid? And it's like, that would make a lot of sense. That would make a lot of
Mm-hmm.
sense for me. And I realize it's a huge responsibility, and in moments that I've been in contact with people who there's been any sort of animosity or separation with, where there's an avoidance, and I feel like, oh, I need to get in there. I need to talk to them. I need to force something. Something I've had to ask myself is, if this I said, does your inner child feel safe with this person, Victoria? And it's like, no. And it's like, so wouldn't this be the same thing as bringing a child back into an abusive household?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you want to get closer until you can kind of put some of this in perspective to secure yourself well? Um, so I think that that's been a really important thing, has been not so much a codependency, but a responsibility outside of maybe myself in a conscious moment, has been what in me needs to be tended to, that I need to
Mm-hmm.
put that before what I feel inclined to react to in that moment.
And that, my friends, like, is going to give you so much clarity, so many answers, same as like the safety thing. Like, how do I cultivate safety? What does this part of me need? The part of me that doesn't feel safe. And that is a game changer. Shadow work, somatics, inner child work. That's all you need. And I swear by it. And I will continue to until I'm blue in the face.
Yeah, totally. And I think that the way you deliver it has helped me simplify that process so much. I don't need to
Mm-hmm.
like, don't get me wrong, I can sit there and journal and I can, go through a movement practice perhaps, but your process with me has always been so simple. It's really like, okay, what are you experiencing? What is it you want from this person? Where do you see that showing up for you? Great. Where is that in your body? How old is that version of you? What does it need? Can you go meet that need? And it's like, that's the process. And it's so
Yeah.
simple every time. And I think there's been times I've even come back to you hoping for something where I'm like, this is going to be the day where she tells me
She's gonna
how
say
wrong
something.
this other person is. She's going to be on my side finally. And I think that that's something that's really important, is you remind me that a lot of the support that I need in codependency is you giving me the level-headedness to snap myself out of the idea that there even is some sort of conflict,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I think that that's it. And I think it's like you've just really helped me see how the conflict is not between me and the person, it's arising within me. So it's there to
Mm-hmm.
be resolved within me. And when you don't let me get the dopamine hit by, battling it out with Patrick, just the other day when you when you decided to have Patrick on the show, and I'm like, I was talking to him and he told me I was being codependent, and I'm like, she's ruined him. Like Alyssa's broken him. Like I can't even be manipulative anymore, but I think that that's really what it is. And I think that that's really been a key piece to just this past year, having me coming to this real understanding of, while there's a lot that I am responsible for, I feel like there's this like shift in like really becoming an adult where everything you look at, like the first thing you ask yourself is what is and is not my responsibility here. Like what is
Mm-hmm.
and is not. And it's shifted things tremendously. So as always, just a huge thank you for your steadiness is what I want to say, is that you are just such a steady human, not just as a friend, but in mentorship, where like you don't divert from the path, and you're not, and then this has been really important for me as well, is like you're not afraid of like big feelings, big
Mm.
emotions, big situations. And that's allowed me to check myself in the moments where I'm like, ooh, Vic, like, who are you trying to intimidate to try to get your way because the emotion's big? And it's actually helped me reflect even more on where I'm probably coming in, trying to be like, so Liz, you want a trauma bond? Like just a little, like just tell me that they're wrong. Just tell me for once that I'm right. And you kind of, and I believe that in a lot of ways, like codependency needs to be starved, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
validating that part of us. Um, that continues and perpetuates it. And you've just been super steady in not feeding into that, and I think that that's been really really helpful, because the friends that just co-sign everything that you want them to are not necessarily the friends that are going to help you grow.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that because as we just wrap up this, episode, that's a huge that's a huge challenge that I've experienced even in friendships, and losing friendships because I won't gossip with you about another person. I will walk away from the conversation. I will divert the conversation lovingly, right? I'm not being like, you're gossiping. That's bad. I don't gossip. It's just like, oh, yeah, sounds like you want to have a conversation with that person, and like, I would love to talk to you about you and like what's like how you're feeling. And a lot of people don't like that. And I respect and honor that. That's where people are at. Um, but sometimes I would be lying if I wasn't honest and transparent that like sometimes you're just like, fuck, I don't want to lose friends over this though, you know. But still staying true. Like I know this is for the best for me. I know it's for the best for them. And sometimes like when you're on healing codependency, the journey, people are gonna fall off because they're not gonna co-sign on on um on ways of relating that are actually just false. Gossip is just this like false connection, and there's other ways to build connection with people who can meet you where you're at.
Without a doubt. And I think with that, you've also just taught me how to hold a higher standard even in friendship, which I think has just created a lot more integrity, where, sometimes people are like, I don't want like coach mentor Vic, I want friend Vic. And it's like, they're not that different.
Yeah, you're
They're not
gonna
that
get the
different.
same me.
100%. Yeah. And I mean,
Yeah.
like, I can even say that like coach Alyssa and friend Alyssa are really not that different. I mean, friend Alyssa might have some moments where she's just like, am I overthinking this? And it's like, yeah, you're overthinking this for
Yeah.
sure. But like at your core, I think that that's one of the things that I respect the most about you, is that you're just so, again, steady. And like the integrity is there across the board in your principles. And while maybe I get like the privilege of seeing like a little bit more of your humanness in certain ways, which is a lot of fun to be able to give back to you in any way I can, right? um, but I think that that's something that is rare to find, people who are that kind of steady and who are willing to put space in relationships where it's not in integrity with the same work that they preach. And I think that that's what allows your work to remain simple and powerful, and consistent. And I think it's what makes you a really safe place, is that you're not looking to make people comfortable, because you're just real.
Mm, thank you for that reflection. Oh, I'm gonna holding it so close to my heart. We fucking went off on this episode. We've been just a little. Longest episode of the year. You're welcome. I am not surprised. It's with Vic. You guys got a very simplified version of what it is to experience her and I in a room together. If I wasn't recording an episode, best believe we'd be on the phone for probably at least 4 more hours, because
Unquestionably.
that's how it would be. But we will wrap this up. Thank you so much for chatting about just how you've experienced codependency and the lens in which it's provided you this new outlook on your, not only your relationships, but like your friendships and also your business. Like, I think bringing this lens to how it can impact very like different facets of our life is really powerful, and it definitely is the root of my mission, is to like show how it like pokes its head in all of these different areas, and so that we can be empowered by making different choices, and ones that actually bring more autonomy and sovereignty to ourselves and our lives. So thanks for having this conversation with me, babe.
It's my pleasure. So happy to do it.
All right, so that's it for this week's episodes, and I will talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you for joining me on Codependency Alchemy. If you found this podcast helpful, I would love it if you would consider leaving an honest rating and review so that others can discover these valuable insights and tools as well. Find out how codependency might be impacting your life by taking the self-assessment, which you can find in the show notes below. Thanks again for tuning in, and remember, you are worthy of healthy, fulfilling relationships, and you have the power to transform your codependency into sovereignty.